Welcome back to DCB's weekly college football recap. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go. It is that time of week again where we recap what was an eventful week 12 and a very successful week 12 over here. If you were following our picks, not only the picks that we gave out on the podcast early in the week last week, but also if you were in our space on Saturday morning. We do those live at 10 a.m. Eastern Time every single week over there on Twitter. My handle is dailycfbcbb, so be sure to follow me over there so you don't miss anything. We went 14-5 on our picks officially, and then another 8-4 on some extra leans that we gave out in the space. So an incredible Saturday. I know the people that joined me as speakers also had great days, so very successful day for the community, and you love to see that. As always, we like to begin by talking about the midweek action. And as we are deep into the season now, we're getting some Tuesday night games each week. Both of the Tuesday night Maction games were awesome in week 12. Kent State and Akron went to overtime. Kent State pulls out the win 42-35. Pretty high scoring in this one. On the surface, a 4-6 record for Kent State may not seem all that impressive, but given that they had a 26-game losing streak against FBS opponents at one point, the fact that they are still possibly in contention to make a bowl game with 2 games remaining in the season tells me their coach should probably be up for Coach of the Year in the conference. It's not like their wins are against great teams and they will be underdogs in both of their remaining 2 matchups, but still a very solid step forward for the program. 5 passing touchdowns for their quarterback, Drew DeShields, who is just a sophomore. So if they can keep him around for next year, maybe they will be actually in a position to contend for the MAC for the first time in around a decade, I would say. And the other game on Tuesday was one that we nailed. We were spot on with this one on the podcast last week. Gave out Western Michigan money line as a pick, and they came through for us. 17-13, low scoring, very cold weather game. It was about 35 degrees at kickoff there at Western's campus, and you saw both teams really struggle to move the ball through the air. As a result, no surprise there, but Western eventually wins the battle in the trenches and comes away with a big one to stay in the MAC title race. They are actually now in the driver's seat to make it to Detroit. There are 5 teams tied behind them in second place, and Ohio is now one of them. Wednesday night's games featured 3 pretty straightforward blowouts. All 3 favorites won and covered the spread. Northern Illinois showed some life offensively for the first time all season. I suppose playing UMass will do that to a team. UMass drops to 0-10. They are far and away the worst team in Division I. Central Michigan picked up a big win, pulling away from Buffalo in the second half, 38-19. And then Toledo really has taken control, I think, in terms of being the best team on paper in this league. If they can just make it to Ford Field, they should win that game regardless of who the opponent is. I really believe there is a significant gap now between them and the rest of the programs. What really hurt Miami of Ohio in this spot was their quarterback, DeQuan Finn, once a Toledo player, ironically enough, decided to sit this game out and, in fact, the rest of the season for the Red Hawks, supposedly in preparation for the NFL draft. It's not like this guy is a first-round pick or anything. I don't really get that decision. His backup struggled mightily in this one against a top 20 pass defense. He went just 11 for 38 for 147 yards and 3 interceptions. He was sacked 6 times, and Toledo smothered the run game as well, held Miami of Ohio to just 3 points on their home field. Very impressive performance on defense, and Chip Trayanum is probably the best running back in this league. There was one game on Thursday night, and really not too much needs to be said about this one. Old Dominion just dominated Troy from start to finish, 33-0. Impressive performance by the defense here as well. held Troy to just 2 for 16 on third and fourth downs and 138 total yards of offense. Solid season for ODU. They needed to beat JMU in order to contend for this conference due to the fact that they're in the same division. They won't get a chance at the rematch in a potential conference title game as a result of that, but they probably are the second best team in the Sun Belt. On Friday night, you had two games, one that was close and one that definitely was not. That was Oregon taking care of Minnesota. The second and third tiered teams in the Big Ten continue to struggle to scale up to the top teams in the league. And this was the perfect example of that. A 6-3 Minnesota team going into Eugene. They were a 27-point underdog, and Oregon covered that number. So as much as people like to compare the Big Ten and the SEC, and clearly the top of the Big Ten is just as good as any league in America, there just is not the depth of competition as there is with the SEC. As we get into the results from Saturday, you will see the difference between when a second to third tier team in the Big Ten goes on the road and plays a real contender versus when that happens in the SEC. But the game that was close on Friday night was once again a pretty low-level game between two ACC teams. This conference continues to disappoint overall this season. Their contenders just have not been able to come through in positions to stay alive for the playoff, and this one officially knocks Louisville out of contention. They probably knocked themselves out the week prior with the home loss to Cal, but this is now back-to-back here at home, this time to Clemson. Louisville did hold the lead for a good portion of this game, but if you watched it, it really did feel like Clemson was the better team throughout. They were just 1 of 13 on third down, which held them back for much of the game. But once they figured it out a little bit in the fourth quarter, they were able to score the touchdown to put themselves ahead for good and get multiple defensive stops after that. Louisville missed 2 field goals in the fourth quarter, so got a feel for that kicker as they lose by 1 point following that. But a deserved win for Clemson nonetheless. That will conclude their ACC season at 4-4. Yet another season at 500 or better for Dabo Swinney. I believe that's every year, at least since the first season he got there. They have 2 relatively favorable matchups to finish the season and could absolutely be 7-5. Not a great year for Clemson, but better than it looked to be given the 1-3 start and the home loss to Syracuse in week 4. All right, time to move over to the main show on Saturday. Bunch of very important games to break down. We'll start with one that should have been a pretty straightforward result on paper, especially if you look at the box score after the game. However, Michigan once again really struggled with a Big Ten opponent going on the road this time and beating Northwestern just 24-22. They dominated time of possession. They had 25 first downs to Northwestern's 11. They were 9 of 14 on third down. Northwestern was just 2 for 12. And they outgained them 496-245. However, one stat that can flip a game sometimes is turnovers, and Michigan had 5 of them in this game. 3 fumbles lost, and then 2 late interceptions by Bryce Underwood in the fourth quarter. Underwood played phenomenally throughout the game until that fourth quarter. Still made some clutch plays on the final drive, but I thought this game really showed some growth for him towards the tail end of his freshman season. One of the mistakes was clearly him just trying to do too much, getting a little frustrated with the lack of points despite the overall level of success that the offense was having. They just could not punch it into the end zone, only had 7 points by halftime. So still needs to mature there, but after doing a little bit of digging, I believe this is the only game in Big Ten history where a team has turned it over 5 times and not forced one themselves and still won the game. So admirable job by Michigan to just escape with a close one here. They've got some things to clean up, but I believe the ceiling is continuing to rise for this team despite some of the injuries that they've continued to sustain. Down in SEC country, there was very nearly one of the biggest upsets of the season. South Carolina went into Kyle Field and led Texas A&M 30-3 at halftime. The game essentially flipped in about 5 minutes of the third quarter, though, where Texas A&M scored 3 touchdowns, got right back in the game, and ultimately won it by 1 point, 31-30. Obviously, we know Texas A&M is the better team here, but as I was alluding to with the Friday results, the depth of the SEC is simply unmatched. South Carolina is a 3-7 football team, and yet they pushed an undefeated team to the limit and had them on the ropes in the first half. This game has certainly put some more scrutiny on Texas A&M's overall schedule. They do have the road win over Notre Dame in the non-conference, but all of their SEC opponents are in the bottom half of the standings. It's kind of remarkable. They get to play FCS Samford to warm up before they hit the road to play Texas in their final game, and that will probably be their toughest SEC test to date. Speaking of Notre Dame, they continue to look impressive. A dominant road win at Pitt, 37-15. That's an 8-game win streak now for this team. The 2 blemishes on the resume both came in the first 2 games. At Miami by 3 points and then by 1 against Texas A&M. They still need to finish out the season with 2 more wins to get into the playoff at 10-2, but Syracuse and Stanford, it's hard to imagine either one of them putting up a fight against this Irish team that currently looks like a juggernaut on both sides of the ball now. The offense has been great all year, but now that the defense is starting to match them, this is truly a national title contending team. They are more than a 5-touchdown favorite against the Orange this weekend. There's just no way they lose that game, or against Stanford, in my opinion, so you can basically pencil Notre Dame into your brackets right now. On the other side, for Pitt, they really struggled offensively in this game, just could not match the athletes that Notre Dame had at the line of scrimmage, and true freshman Mason Heinschel was a little bit rattled. Pitt came in on a 5-game win streak, and their coach had some bizarre things to say in the press conference before the game. He said that he essentially didn't care if they lost by 100 in this game because it's not an ACC conference matchup. A crazy thing to say out loud as the head coach of a football team, but that's kind of how his team performed, especially on offense in this game. We'll see if they can be more focused as they hit the road to take on Georgia Tech this weekend and then close against Miami. 2 huge matchups for the Panthers to close. Over in the Big 12, you had Arizona knocking off number 25 Cincinnati in the early window. This Wildcats team just continues to be impressive throughout the season. They had one real stinker at Iowa State where they got thumped by 25 points. But with this win, they moved to 7-3, and their other 2 losses were both very close to very good teams. This turnaround by Brett Brennan and his staff has been very impressive and really hasn't been talked about too much this season, but Arizona has a real chance to finish 9-3 after being a bottom feeder last season, even with an NFL wide receiver on the team. On the other side, in my opinion, the losses were always coming for the Cincinnati team. They have a very backloaded schedule, got most of their easier Big 12 matchups out of the way early, but now have lost back-to-back games. They've got a huge one to look forward to now this weekend against number 12 BYU. A notable early result in the group of 5 was Navy knocking off ranked South Florida 41-38. This game was a classic American Conference shootout. Both teams putting up over 500 yards of total offense. But South Florida's run defense has been an issue all season, and when you play an option team like Navy, that's going to become a glaring weakness immediately, and Navy was able to rack up over 300 yards on the ground in this one. Multiple guys put up 100 plus. This loss for USF now puts them at 7-3 and effectively knocks them out of the playoff picture. Navy technically stays alive with just one conference loss, but they will still need some help from the tiebreakers in order to get into the American Conference title game. One more early group of 5 game that I want to mention before we move a little later in the day and start covering some of the other major conference results again. I just have to highlight North Texas one more time. Nobody is talking about this team, but they are now the favorites to be that group of 5 playoff representative. Another dominant win, 53-24 over a bad UAB team. This offense can score against anyone, and it will be very interesting to see what their draw is if they do make it into the field. As I remind you guys all the time, if you did listen to the off-season preview, we have North Texas locked in both at 15-1 to win the American and at 60-1 to make the college football playoff. Very excited to continue to sweat those futures out with just a few weeks remaining. The afternoon window featured a couple of huge ranked-on-ranked matchups. And we'll start in the SEC with the Oklahoma Sooners going on the road and beating Alabama for the second consecutive year. Last year it was in Norman and they knocked Bama out of the playoffs. Ended up the first team out of the field as a result of that game. And now after it seemed like Alabama would pretty much coast into the playoffs this season, now they've got to finish strong with 2 more wins, including on the road at Auburn to finish the season. Bama really did dominate the box score in this one, doubling up Oklahoma in total yardage. However, as we've mentioned for a number of these games, and as we mention every week, the turnover battle is so important, and Alabama lost it 3-0. One of those was returned for a touchdown in the first quarter to put Oklahoma up 10-0, and they really never looked back from there. Alabama did briefly retake the lead 21-20, but OU kicked a field goal to take the lead back in the fourth quarter, and their defense held strong multiple times against that vaunted Bama offense. The Sooners' corners had really struggled man-to-man against Ole Miss and Tennessee on the outside. They decided to switch things up a little bit more in this game, and really that pass rush remains the key for this defense. They were able to get after Ty Simpson all day long, sacking him 4 times and affecting him many more than that. This was the game for Oklahoma remaining on the schedule. If you look at it now, Missouri and LSU, both far less intimidating than they would have been earlier in the season. They get both of those games at home, and I really can't see a world now where OU does not make the playoffs so long as they win both of those games. They'll be nearly a double-digit favorite against Missouri and their third-string quarterback this weekend, and this defense is going to be very dangerous depending on who they match up with in the playoffs. Another team that won a key ranked-on-ranked matchup to keep their hopes alive was USC, 26-21 over Iowa. Second consecutive game where the Hawkeyes have had a second half lead against a ranked team in the Big Ten and unable to close it out. Back-to-back really close losses. USC, on the other hand, stays in the playoff hunt. Like I said, remains an explosive offense. They did struggle to run a little bit here, but had just enough balance to go with Mekhi Lemon continuing to just dominate this entire season. To me, he is your Biletnikoff winner. There are some other contenders out there, but he's just been incredible. Another game here with 10 catches, 153 yards, and a touchdown. USC's defense also stood up strong in the second half. Iowa didn't score in the final 2 quarters, and USC clearly has made it a point of emphasis this season to be more of a Big Ten style of team and play with more physicality. Iowa is the perfect team to be able to show that you've improved that against, and they sure did, especially in that second half. So impressive for USC. Their season really will be defined by this upcoming weekend when they hit the road to take on Oregon. Couple of games in the ACC in the mid-afternoon slot. Miami took care of business once again, this time against NC State, 41-7. Pretty impressive on both sides of the ball. NC State had beaten a couple of the other ACC contenders, but unable to scale their offensive performance here against the Canes. Miami's now got back-to-back road trips to cold weather places to finish the season, at Virginia Tech and then at Pitt. I think the weather will still be reasonable enough this weekend, but if we get some snow in Pittsburgh to end the season, that would be tremendous. Miami really showed last week by moving from 18 to 15 that they still have some life as a potential at-large playoff team. Despite the relative lack of weakness of the ACC, the wins over Notre Dame and South Florida in the non-conference are big for this team. This was arguably their most complete performance of the season. Virginia and Duke faced off in what was supposed to be a key matchup to decide who got to play in the ACC title game. However, Virginia just went into Durham and completely dominated the Blue Devils. Really, their defense stood up strong in this game, and I was not expecting that at all. I was expecting a real shootout between these two teams, but Virginia led 31-3 after the third quarter. Duke added a couple of late touchdowns to make it look a little bit better, but the Cavaliers, off of their first conference loss, responded in a major way. They now get Virginia Tech at home to finish the season likely 10-2 and should be in that ACC conference championship game. This is probably a good result for the conference overall in the long term because Duke has 3 non-conference losses, and there was a scenario where they won this league, and I don't know that a 9-4 Duke team would have made it into the playoffs. So that scenario is now eliminated, and the title game looks to most likely be Virginia versus Georgia Tech, who is the next team that we will talk about. Once again, GT goes on the road and truly escapes with a win. They trailed 28-17 on the road at Boston College, a team that now falls to 1-10 with this loss. GT wins 36-34. Haynes King, another brilliant performance. He is truly a Heisman contender, and his playmakers were very key in this one as well. Both of his top receivers, Malik Rutherford and Eric Rivers, each go over 100 yards. The defense was very leaky, especially in the second and third quarters. Boston College had 4 consecutive touchdown drives and really had success both on the ground and through the air. They went back to their young quarterback Dylan Lonergan, the Alabama transfer, and he played great. Showed a lot of promise early on in the season. They benched him for a while, but now appears to be the starter once again. Threw for 362 against that Georgia Tech defense. It's hard to imagine either one of these teams, GT or Virginia, really making a lot of noise in the field if they were to get there. But Georgia Tech has 2 huge home games to finish out this season. Before that potential title game, they will host Pittsburgh this weekend before the out-of-conference heavyweight fight against Georgia, a game that went to 8 overtimes last year. A couple of big group of 5 results in the afternoon. First, got to point out East Carolina, another one of those American Conference teams with just 1 conference loss. They do have 3 losses overall, but 2 of those are to NC State and BYU. Their only loss in the league was by 7 points on the road at Tulane. They pick up another home win here over Memphis, 31-27. This one was highly entertaining, back and forth throughout, and East Carolina just wins the battle of attrition. Their defense held Memphis to a field goal with just 2:30 remaining, and the offense then quickly went down the field, responded with a touchdown to take the lead, and held on from there. So the Pirates remain a part of the title conversation, and a lot of the projections based on the tiebreakers that I've seen have them facing North Texas in that game. And one other one that I will just bring up briefly before we go to the night slate, I want to give a quick shout out to Nevada for pulling off their first FBS win of the season. in dominant fashion over San Jose State, 55-10. I have no idea where this performance came from. Carter Jones, the young freshman quarterback, had his best game of the season by far, 16 for 19 for 195 and 2 touchdowns through the air. They were able to run the ball effectively, and they opened this game with a pick six on one of the first drives of the game. So, great win for Nevada. Probably needed a little bit more of this early on in the season, but hey, shout out to them for continuing to fight as the season progresses. In the night slate, we had probably the biggest matchup of the day in terms of just pure athletic talent on the field. A top 10 matchup between Georgia and Texas. This one did not live up to the billing whatsoever. Watching the game, you could clearly see that Texas could match Georgia athlete for athlete, but they were not put in positions to succeed by their coaching staff. This was an absolute disaster class by Steve Sarkisian and his assistants. Kirby Smart ran circles around him all night long, and Georgia wins 35-10. This one completely got away from the Horns in the fourth quarter. It was 14-10 before that final period. However, Texas just gave away opportunity after opportunity. They had a very poor game plan defensively. Their offensive line made Georgia's D-line look good for the first time really all season long. The play calling was extremely questionable, and then up 11 points, Georgia converted an onside kick in the fourth quarter in what was one of the most humiliating moments I've ever seen for a head coach in an SEC game of this caliber. Sarkisian needs to completely reevaluate the way he approaches some of these big games. They were very passive defensively. You do also have to give a ton of credit, though, to Georgia and, in particular, Gunnar Stockton. I think he is tremendously underrated. He is not getting nearly enough love right now for the way that he is leading this offense. The run game has been solid for most of the season. They've bounced back and forth between two running backs, Nate Frazier and Chauncey Bowens, but Stockton has been an incredibly steady hand. He had 4 passing touchdowns, and he ran one in as well in this game. He's gotten much more comfortable with the transfer receivers that they brought in. 2 touchdown passes to Noah Thomas, the big guy, and then Zachariah Branch continues to be electric in space. They've found more ways to use him as the season goes on. No surprise there. Kirby Smart is going to find a way to use his weapons. But I, again, was just stunned at Texas's inability to convert their chances and put together a good enough game plan in a game as big as this. So Texas effectively falls out of the playoff picture. You already know that they're going to try and make a case for them if they finish 9-3 with a win over Texas A&M to finish the season, but I believe there are enough teams right now that are still in contention with either 1 or 2 losses that the Horns are effectively out of it. Maybe if this game remained close, they would have a better case, but the 25-point margin is going to put a major dent in that. A couple of impressive wins in the late night out in Big 12 territory, both in the state of Utah. Utah and BYU both pick up big wins over teams in the state of Texas. Utah dominates Baylor on the road 55-28. They really were able to do whatever they wanted to Baylor's run defense. Devon Dampier only threw for 80 yards in the game, but they put up 380 on the ground, and their offensive line was just moving that front all night long. They also have a very intriguing backup quarterback in freshman Bird Ficklin. They've been working him in with specific packages here and there. He played a decent portion of the Colorado game, and he has blazing speed, just like Dampier, but possibly even faster. He had 2 long touchdown runs in this one, including a 74-yarder. Utah always seems to have these gadget players that they're able to use in very random ways offensively. A couple years ago, they had a free safety that they converted to a halfback/fullback. They always just have some interesting players to use on offense to add a new wrinkle in that the defense may not be expecting. But as a result of BYU beating TCU, Utah now needs a ton of help to potentially get back into the Big 12 title picture. They do have a chance to make it in as an at-large team, though, given how high up they are in the college football playoff rankings. BYU responded in a major way after the loss to Texas Tech. They really got dominated physically in that one, and it was clear that Kalani Sitake's message was to respond in kind with physicality in this game against TCU. The offense was tremendously impressive, especially in the first half, putting up 27 points and then 44 for the game, beating the Horned Frogs by 31 points as just a 3-point favorite. The Lions continue to disrespect this Cougars team. The books just don't understand how good they are, it seems. On BYU's first 34 plays of the game, they had 17 first downs, so half of them they converted a first down on. Bear Bachmeier has been the best freshman quarterback in the country, and I don't think anybody would have predicted that before the season. TCU, on the other hand, has a lot of problems. Josh Hoover continues to struggle mightily against man coverage. He continues to struggle with turnovers. This was the fourth time this season where he's thrown multiple interceptions in a game, and TCU's season is effectively over now, 6-4, and 2 difficult games remaining. So they will have an impact on the Big 12 race regardless of the results of those final couple of matchups, but a real tough look here for Sonny Dykes and his squad. 2 more games that I'll bring up in the night slate in major conference matchups. Both were in the SEC. We'll start with the Lane Kiffin Bowl. Ole Miss holds off Florida 34-24. Had to make a bit of a second half comeback in this one. Florida's offense went very cold in the second half as they struggled to run the ball. Ole Miss adjusted very effectively, and Trinidad Chambliss, their quarterback, continues to make plays when he needs to. Kewan Lacey with a big game, their running back. He has really been one of the best running backs in college football this year, and probably the best one that doesn't get talked about too much. He has over 1,100 yards and 19 touchdowns on the ground now. Big game from him, and Ole Miss moves to 10-1, effectively locking in their playoff spot. They're going to need a lot of help in terms of tiebreaker scenarios if they want to make it to Atlanta, but there is still a slight chance that they can win the SEC. They should be in the field regardless, but would be interesting to see if Lane could actually win the conference. And in the other game, Mississippi State traveled to Missouri, and there were so many chaotic moments in this game, most of which went against Mississippi State, unfortunately. Ahmad Hardy ran for over 200 yards, just gashed that defense all night long. They also made some huge plays defensively, causing some turnovers by Mississippi State, 3 of them to be exact. I had heard that Blake Shapen was doubtful to play in this game throughout the week, but he ended up suiting up for the Bulldogs. Would have liked to see more of the freshman QB Kamario Taylor. He's listed at 6'4", 235, and really a dynamic athlete in the run game and using his arm. So I would like to see more of Taylor moving forward, and I thought he should have started in this game. We'll see if they decide to pull that out for the Egg Bowl, as they have a bye week before that game. Missouri did run the ball very effectively. As I said, Ahmad Hardy has been incredible this year, over 1,300 yards on the ground. But their quarterback situation continues to be a problem. They've got 2 injured guys, and Matt Zollers really did not look very good in this one once again. Struggled against Texas A&M mightily the week before, and had a couple moments in this one, but overall, very shaky situation there. There's a reason why they're nearly a double-digit dog to OU this week. And one final group of 5 result to cap off the night slate. San Diego State really stakes claim to being the best team once again in the Mountain West. Boise State last year won it and took the group of 5 playoff spot. That was with Ashton Genty. Definitely not the same team this season. Kind of remarkable stat. Boise State is 6-4, and all four of their losses, they've scored exactly 7 points in each of those games. San Diego State wins 17-7. Their defense has been phenomenal all season long, and as of right now, they are in the driver's seat to win the Mountain West title. All right, that will do it for the Week 12 recap, but don't go anywhere. We are going to now look forward to Week 13. We've got just 2 weeks remaining of the regular season, unfortunately, so let's make the most of it and make some money along the way. I've got some early picks to lock in here, some lines that are standing out to me, and some games that we'll just discuss because they're interesting. Of course, we've got to start with Tuesday night Maction. This will be just hours after the podcast gets released, so hopefully you guys listen to this and lock this in quickly. I feel like I've had a pretty good feel for this Western Michigan team, and last week we backed them against Ohio successfully. Big game for them there. I am actually kind of worried for them this week, though. They've got to travel to Northern Illinois, a team that they have traditionally really struggled with. The line in this game has moved already from Western Michigan -8.5 down under the keyed number of 7 to 6.5. The total on this game is very low, down there at 38.5. Western Michigan is a very run-heavy offense, and I think NIU will be prepared for that. So I think Western will struggle once again to score a lot of points. It's not like they've been running it up against some of the other opponents that they've faced. I think this will be a very competitive game. So as gross as it is, give me the home underdog in this game. I would love a +7 if you can find it out there, but +6.5 works as well. Should be a one possession game between Western Michigan and Northern Illinois. Another Maction game that I think is interesting. I don't think I'm going to bet this one, but I just want to point it out. A little bit of a line shift here. Buffalo was a slight favorite over Miami of Ohio and their backup quarterback who struggled so much last week against Toledo. Miami of Ohio is now flipped to a slight favorite though, so maybe there's some positive regression coming for that quarterback. Buffalo has been a very unimpressive team all season long, especially on offense themselves. So current lean to the Red Hawks in that one, but that is a real gross game. May end up staying off of it. Best of luck if you do play the Red Hawks. There are only 2 games on Friday night this week, but I'm looking to target both of them. The first one is Florida State and North Carolina State. First of all, I love the total in this game to go over. North Carolina State's defense has been one of the worst in the Power 4 all season long. And I think their offense will bounce back here after scoring just 7 points against Miami. They did that one other time earlier in the season where they scored just 7 on the road at Notre Dame, bounced back and scored 34 the next week in a loss at Pitt. Yes, in a loss, 34 points. And Florida State has gotten it back together a little bit here. They've won 2 of their last 3 games. We know there's a ton of talent on this roster. They've recruited at a top 20 level every season under Mike Norvell. Just had some bumps in the road, but I fully expect their offense to show up here. So lean Florida State as well to cover the number, but I definitely like over at 61.5, which is the current number that I'm looking at. And in the late night matchup, we've got a Mountain West game between Hawaii and UNLV. This is actually a classic rivalry within the conference. And I like Hawaii here to win this game outright. They are a 3-point underdog, but they come into this game rested off of a bye. And UNLV to me has been one of the most fraudulent teams all season long. They are 8-2 and currently second in the Mountain West. Hawaii right behind them. They're in third. These 2 teams are tied with the same conference record, battling to be that team to face San Diego State in the conference title game. UNLV just squeaked by Utah State with a double overtime 29-26 win this past weekend. Over the past couple of games, they have finally moved towards now having a positive yardage differential for the season with an 8-2 record, but it's very marginal. They've given up a ton of yards in every game this season. Their defense is extremely leaky, and I think the Rainbow Warriors will be able to take advantage. I think they're slightly better defensively, and Micah Alejado is one of the best quarterbacks that rarely gets talked about in this sport. So give me the Rainbow Warriors +3 on the road at UNLV Friday night. Now, unfortunately, as I look down the board for Saturday in week 13, there aren't a ton of lines that I'm looking to jump out and get ahead of. So if you guys are looking for a more thorough breakdown of all of those games, of course, be sure to join us on the space over there, but I will give you guys a couple of lines that are standing out to me. Just going to keep it a little bit more brief this week. The lines are getting pretty sharp, and I don't expect a ton of these to move quite as much as they might have earlier in the season. Another reason for that is now we have college basketball, which means a lot of the bigger bettors are starting to move over to that sport and leaving this one, meaning the lines are not moving around quite as much. So not as much urgency to lock them in. One game that is occurring in the group of 5, though, that I would get in front of, especially if you can find a +3, that's going to be UTSA against East Carolina. I just mentioned ECU in the recap as a team that is technically still alive in this conference. However, even though UTSA is just 5-5, they've played a really difficult schedule in the non-conference. One of those losses was at Texas A&M. They've got road losses at North Texas and South Florida. And on paper, this is one of the most talented group of 5 teams in America. I think they actually have some advantages over ECU, especially on the offensive side. So if you can get a 3, especially, jump on UTSA as a home dog. One game in the night slate that is sticking out to me just based on the number. I've mentioned how fortunate Georgia Tech has been in a lot of their games this season. They are just a 2.5-point favorite over Pittsburgh at home. That Pitt team that just got annihilated by Notre Dame this past weekend. Now the books are saying they would be a slight favorite over Georgia Tech on a neutral field. That is fascinating to me. And this also presents a sort of a hedge opportunity for us. We have Georgia Tech to make the playoffs in the preseason at +750. They need this game to make it to the ACC conference title. If they lose, I believe Pitt would jump them and a couple other teams in terms of tiebreakers. So truly winner take all for a spot in that game between these two teams. And last but not least, let's go over to the Big 12, where we've got ranked on ranked, at least from last week's poll, but I don't think Cincinnati's going to be ranked this week. They host BYU off back-to-back losses. I think this is a nice time to get back on board with Cincy. BYU plays a ton of man coverage, which is the main reason why they were able to shut down TCU. An offense that really struggles to work against man coverage. That is what Brendan Sorsby dices up for Cincinnati, though. He loves to take deep shots one-on-one with his big receivers on the outside and use his legs to escape as well. I think this is going to be a very high-level game between two very fun offenses that put their players in fun positions to make plays and good schemes all around. So I lean over in this game as well between BYU and Cincinnati. The total looks like it's already moving up from 53.5 to 54.5. But I also like the Bearcats as a 2.5-point home underdog. No, I have not had success fading BYU, but I have had a better feel for this team generally over the past couple of weeks. And a Cincinnati win here would throw so much of a wrench into the Big 12 title picture that it just has to happen. So give me the Bearcats and the over as well in that game. As I said, for a more thorough breakdown of the entire Week 13 Saturday slate, be sure to join us live on Twitter, 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. But until then, I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning into this podcast, and I also want to highlight a couple of things. One, if you're listening to this on Spotify, there is a poll for you to answer each week. It's just a simple poll of who you were most impressed by this previous week of college football. We also always appreciate any likes and comments, especially those that give constructive feedback. Always like to hear from the community, so be sure to do that and subscribe while you're at it on whichever platform that you're listening to. So Appreciate you once again for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.